What are the elements of an army that is about to break? A combination of a high casualty rate, a lack of external support for the war, and finally, a general feeling among the soldiers that their leaders have betrayed them. Well, according to this brilliantly written article, all three are present in the Ukrainian army. But before we get into it, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit the notification bell. And without further ado, let's get into it. Defeated army and a broken army are two different things. An army merely defeated in battle can often make successful withdrawals, reform itself, and reconstitute its strength, as Rome did after its humiliation at Cannae, eventually destroying its great rival, Carthage. But when whole armies break, when they lose their will to fight, the whole nation can likewise break. This is what happened to the great empires in World War I. It is also the fate awaiting the Ukrainian army. How does a nation at war get to a place where its fighters refuse to fight? Part of what breaks an army is attrition, which results from both casualties and the trauma that comes along with battlefield losses. Trauma among the still living wears them down. Their vitality is a fighting force, leaks out from those untouched as much as from the wounded, as ardor and hope, the energies on which combat performance depends, keep seeping out. How much wearing down can an army take before it breaks down? Hence, attrition is wearing down both physically and psychologically. How much wearing down can an army take before it breaks down? 1 million or so served in the Confederate Army, 350,000 died, and another 200,000 or so were wounded. This was truly mind-bending attrition. Half of all men who fought for an army that, in the end, yielded to the Union still unbroken. Their captain surrendered rather than fight a lost war, and soldiers who would have followed him to hell laid down their arms. Casualties, however, are only part of the attrition equation. Over time, they drain the ardor and hope that peak when war is first declared, before blood is spilled. Yet even an exhausted and dispirited army will keep fighting as long as its soldiers remain committed to the cause. Hence, in World War I, armies that would suffer tens of thousands of casualties in a single day. Britain took 60,000 on the first day of the Somme. Italy lost 350,000 in 17 days at Caporetto, somehow kept fighting. Yet commitment will flag and then fail if and when three other factors unfold. Think of these as negative feedback bellows, inflaming the already negative angst of attrition. The first negative feedback bellow is when a war that began full of high hopes seems suddenly unwinnable. Early victories are now old memories. More battles are lost than won, and the costs of battle keep rising to the very threshold of human endurance, and then rise again. The second is when external support from friends and allies begins to evaporate. This is an especially acute negative factor if Allied support is the emotional foundation of the army's belief in ultimate victory. Third and finally, those who initiated the war, those who promised a road paved with victory, and who vowed that the world would support the army until victory was won, no matter how long it takes, are increasingly seen as liars and deceivers. The army, the entire nation, has been betrayed by its leaders. All this has descended on Ukraine in the past 6 weeks. There have been no victories, not even bloody and debilitating wins like the Fourth Battle of Kharkov for nearly a year. Western leaders still profess that their support will continue, yet the Western alliance now admits it didn't give Ukrainians nearly enough good stuff for even modest tactical gains in their ongoing sacrificial offensive, and knew it going in. And increasingly, Ukrainian unit-level commanders are accusing higher leaders of simply using them as cannon fodder to satisfy NATO overlords. Not just platoons, but larger units are surrendering to Russian forces. Morale is catering. This is attrition coming to fruition. The fallen empires of 1918 in Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, and the Ottomans needed 4 years to reach that point. In a third of that time, Ukraine has lost 2.5% of its population. This reckoning amounts to what Soviet historians called irreplaceable losses, meaning all soldiers who would never ever return to their ranks. Indeed, the real Ukrainian losses may well be higher. Reckoning losses is a composite judgment based on a mosaic of serious methodology, as well as incautious NATO, Ukrainian, and Western media admissions, all synced to the incontestable casualty measure proved in World War I, that is, comparative artillery delivery. This has favored Russia over Ukraine by a factor of up to 10 to 1. Add the unbending devotion of Ukrainian forces to high casualty assaults, plus Russia's equal devotion to conservation of force, and the picture looks utterly grim for Kiev. Now, new evidence of the scale of the Ukrainian catastrophe from many vectors is stacking up, simply by counting Ukrainian obituaries or dead SIM cards. But this raises the question, are Russian forces in better shape? Yes. After more than 500 days, the Russian war effort now benefits from very much lower, irrecoverable casualties by a factor of at least 5 to 1. Army-wide confidence stemming from resilience in failure, successful adaptation under fire, and rapidly evolving operational art, a string of success along the front, and a surge in strategic momentum, a feeling across the nation that Russia has the men, the tools, and the hard-won battlefield skill to finish the job. And the very sight of Ukraine's last NATO-built army burning before their very eyes, what adds up for Russia subtracts from Ukraine. Despite Ukraine's high casualty count, some contend that the overall situation is salvageable. Yet, the casualty outcome is the decisive factor, because losses in war must be stacked up against the health and stability of the entire society. Ukraine has nearly the lowest fertility in the world, and a straight up and down age graph by demographic cohort. Put bluntly, the men lost in the past 500 days won't sire progeny. This is why a reckoning of Ukrainian irreplaceable losses is significant. It isn't just the dead, but also the crippled among men that can bring society down. This is the spiral that France went down after World War I. Several 100,000 men lost one or more limbs. We know now that Ukraine is mirroring the French horror. 50,000 Ukrainians have lost one or more limbs, close to the 67,000 for Germany in World War I. Ukraine in 1994 was 52 million strong. Then disaster set in. First, the best and brightest youth sought brighter futures in the European Union and Russia. Then the terror after 2014 accelerated the outflow. Now the war has effectively taken half of the people geographically out of their land. Ukraine was a nation of perhaps 33 million in early 2022. Today, a quarter of that already diminished country's population has fled to the European Union, and another quarter is in the now Russian oblasts, or residing as new migrants in the Russian Federation itself. Ukraine, at 20 million, ranks somewhat bigger than the Netherlands and somewhat smaller than Taiwan. Yet, in casualties to population terms, Ukrainian military losses after more than 500 days of war are approaching those sustained by Germany in World War I over more than 1,500 days. This is a catastrophic attrition rate, compounded by all three negative feedback loops that can break an army and a nation. Throughout the spring and summer, Ukrainian forces were thrown into battle and ground down. By autumn, the fighting army will have been spent, the tragic fate of Ukraine's best in 2023. By September, what is left will be twisting and bending toward breaking in the remorseless winds of war.